Hello, everybody. Good to have you all here. It's it's Tuesday. It's time for our special talk with Roberto Watanabe. He's keeping going with the studies of the Genesis. And today he's going to talk for an important topic, which is God. Let's understand more about how it works, what it is, who is it, if it's a person or not. No, so uh, it's good to always learn how is the spiritist view regarding to God. And I want to say welcome, Roberto. Thank you again for
Thank
your
you.
availability. Thank you for being here with us.
Thank
Uh,
you, Esteban.
SP for helping us and all the support we have received in all these years. So thank you so much.
I thank you for this opportunity.
Okay, good. So first things first, I will do our initial prayer. So let's do it.
Okay.
So let's have a deep breath. Let's connect with our mentors of this program, mentors of ESP, mentors of Irish Spiritist Federation. Ask them to enlighten ourselves in today's special enlighten Roberto Tanabe in order to guide him to use the right words, and may his message reach out to those brothers and sisters who are in need, those who are watching us online, and those who will watch us later on. May this message reach them, reach their family. So be it. Amen. Okay, okay. So let me put up your presentation here,
Okay.
and there we go.
Okay. Thank you, Esteban. So, hello, everybody. Glad to be here again to talk about the book Genesis from Allan Kardec. Now, today we are going to see the chapter 2 of the book, which is about God. We have seen during this semester uh, some issues about the genesis of the universe, then genesis of life, genesis of the spirits, which are ourselves, and then about the spiritual fluids. And now that we went through all the some topics of the creation, let's talk a little bit about the creator, right? Which is God. So let's start as Stephen said in the beginning. We are going to see who is God. You know, I would say that well, the philosophers say that it's easier to know what God is not rather than what God is. But anyway, we are going to try here, according to Kardec, uh, some knowledge about God. And let's start by the existence of God. So, the proof of the existence of God is, well, the main proof is everything that we have seen in these last five presentations, which is the creation by itself, right? Because this is the material evidence of the fact that God exists. Because as Kardec says in the book, the Genesis book, Genesis, I mean, written by Kardec, right? No, it's not the book Genesis from Moses. And then Kardec says that every intelligent effect must have an intelligent cause. Then, if we look at the creation, at the works of nature, we realize that all of these surpass the highest reach of the human mind, of our mind. So why is that, right? Because they are the product of an intelligence much much superior than that of ourselves as humanity. And then that's why we say that God is the first cause of all things, is the point of a departure for everything, because the universe started by God creating it, right? So creating ourselves, and God is also the foundation upon which the edifice of creation rests. Some philosophers, like René Descartes, for example, the French philosopher from the 17th century, he used to say that as marvelous as God creating the universe, is God maintaining the universe in existence. That's why that's what we can understand, right? Right, about the foundation, which is God, foundation of the creation, because God created us and it keep us in existence. And but God per se does not appear to us. It is affirmed through God's works, which is ourselves and the universe. And let's now see something about the nature of God. Well, that what we can apprehend, right, by our reason, our reasoning. The inner nature of God is not given to us, uh, of course, because we are still imperfect beings. To comprehend God, we need to purify ourselves, right, through our, well, the many reincarnations that we face ahead of us, right? And then when we complete such complete purification, then we will be able to see God. But now we can, by our reasoning, arrive at some knowledge about God, right? And some about, for example, God's necessary attributes, and to reach such attributes, to get such the knowledge of such attributes, and we can reason by ourselves, by seeing what God cannot at all cease to be without being God. Right? Then by that way, we can arrive at some idea of what God must be. And then we have the attributes of God. The first is that the God is the supreme and sovereign intelligence, right? Because we as human beings, we have intelligence, but our intelligence is not sovereign as God's intelligence. Is not infinite like God's intelligence, and our intelligence is limited because we neither can make it nor comprehend everything that exists. We know that science, for example, is still trying to understand, right, the the basics of nature. And God's intelligence embracing the infinite, because He created all this universe. God's intelligence must be infinite. And Kardec says that if it were supposed that God was limited at any point, then we could conceive of a still more intelligent being capable of comprehending and doing what the other being could not do, right? And that being would be God. So, but this is just a supposition, right? Because there is no being more intelligent than God. And another attribute of God is eternity. We say that God is eternal. Eternal meaning that God has no beginning. God itself was not created by nobody, right? And also having no end. So That's the meaning of eternal, something that has no beginning and also no end. If God had a beginning, Kardec says, uh, God would have sprung from nothingness. But nothingness, being nothing, cannot produce anything, right? So God was not created by no one, and God existed by itself. And then, if God had a beginning, another situation would be that if God had a beginning, God would have been created by another uh, previously existing being, and then that being would be God, right? So which has no sense, right? And finally, if it were supposed that God uh, had a beginning, or will have an end, then we could conceive of an entity, a being, which have existed before God, and or that are capable of existing after God, and then such a being would be God, right? So just this is just kind of an argument, right? Arguments that Kardec is following here in order to prove that there is no such other being uh, equal to God, right? Regarding eternity. Another attribute of God is immutability. So we say that God is immutable. Is not. God does not change. Right? God does not become more intelligent or less intelligent, right? Because his intelligence is infinite. And then, if God was immutable, then God would be subject to change. And in that case, the laws that, let's say, the physical laws that govern all the universe would have no stability. And that's not what we see, right? We see that there is an order in the universe according to some physical laws that we are still discovering, right? As science advances in its research. Another attribute that we say of God is that God is immaterial. We, for example, we have our body, right? So our body is material. Then we can think about this discarnate person, or we ourselves after we die. Right? We go to the spiritual realm, but even then we will have our spiritual body, a perispirit, and that is still is something material. Right? It's not dense like the material of our body, but it still is material. And God has no such kind of a material, either dense material or subtle material. So that's why we say that God's nature differs from everything that we can call matter. God is immaterial because if was material, then God would not be immutable. The other attribute that we just have seen would not be possible because God would be subject to the transformation of matter. And that's why God is immaterial. We say that God has no form perceivable to our senses, meaning that we cannot see with our eyes God, because our eyes can also see material things, and God is immaterial. Right? Let's proceed here. Another attribute is we say that God is powerful, and if God did not possess supreme power, right? Because if God did not possess supreme power, we could conceive of a more powerful being, and that being would be God. And then uh, another attribute of God, we say that God is supremely just and good. And we see the providential wisdom of the divine laws all over the universe is revealed in the tiniest things as well as in the greatest. So we say that such divine laws are commanding, right, the movement of galaxies, solar systems, and also the birth of a tiny plant of a small insect, right? So all this the order in the universe we see as a providential wisdom from God, right? So that's why we say He's supremely just and good. And such wisdom, Kardec says, does not allow any doubt about God's justice or goodness. And supreme goodness implies supreme justice, because if God were to act unjustly or with partiality, preferring someone rather than another being or another person, God would not be supremely just and consequently would not be supremely good. Right? So you see that Kardec follows all the attributes of God uh, with some argument, right, proving that attribute. We also say that God is infinitely perfect. So it's impossible to conceive of a God without infinite perfections. And this is something that only God has, right? Such infinite perfections. If we conceive of a God without such infinite perfections, then we could conceive of a being with a perfect than God, and then that would be God, right? So that has no sense for us, and that's why we say that God's attribute is infinite, and they are such attributes, all of that we have seen, just seen, they are not susceptible to increasing or diminishing because they are infinite already, right? So they cannot increase more than what they are, and they cannot diminish from what they are. And otherwise, they would not be infinite, and then God would not be perfect or infinite perfect, right? So these are the arguments from Kardec we see in the book of Genesis. Uh, we also say that God is unique. There is only one God. Right? We, as human beings, for example, we are, for example, on Earth, we are 8 billion right, human beings on just on Earth. But we have spirits or human beings and other planets spread around all over the universe, right? And so that there are many human beings as individuals, but that does not happen with the God, right? Because there is only one God. There is no other God, right, in reality. So that's what that's why we say that God's oneness is the consequence of the absolute infiniteness of God's perfection. Just one being can have such absolute perfection and such infinite perfection. And then it was the ignorance of the principle of infiniteness of God's perfection that gave rise to polytheism. Polytheism is the belief in many gods, right? As in the primitive people, because they saw some phenomena from nature that make them marvelous, and then whoa, this is the god of thunder, for example, right? And then the god of the ocean, and so on and so forth. Uh, but now we say that there is just one being, which is infinite perfect, and that is God. And that's why reason, right? Later reason led them, or led us in those times to fuse all various powers or gods into only one. So this was the attributes of a god. And now let's take it that talks a little bit about providence that we have mentioned, right? Already in one of the attributes. when we said that God is supremely just and good, right? So providence, the divine providence or God's providence is the care that God has for all creatures, right? All the universe, all the human beings, all the animals, right? All the plants, all the living beings in the universe. So this is the care that God has for all of us. And following that, we say that God is everywhere, right? Not just here on Earth, but on other planets, on other galaxies, right? All over the universe. And God sees and presides over everything through the divine laws. We say that we learn from the spiritual book that there are two types of laws, right? The physical laws that governs matter, and also the moral laws that govern ourselves as spirits. And God presides over everything, and even the very smallest things, as we have said already, right? And this is what providential action consists of. And as God is everywhere, then that means that we are constantly in the presence of God. There is no one action of ourselves that we may hide from God's gaze. God is seeing everything. That's why it is correct to say that God reads the deepest folds of our mind. We cannot hide anything from God, and that's why Christ have said, "We are in God just as God is in us," meaning that not that doesn't mean that we are God or part of God, right? But just meaning that um, God maintains us our existence, like I said in the beginning, and God sees everything that we think or we know. So that's the meaning here. We are in God just as God is in us. And we can also think about in the spiritual book when Kardec asks the spirits, where is God's law, or the divine law? And then the spirits answered it, in our conscience. So that is the meaning also of God being in us, meaning that His laws, the laws of love, of justice, of goodness, uh, are all in our conscience, actually in our deep conscience, right? And then God is everywhere in nature, right? In the same way that the spirit is everywhere in the body. So we, as a spirit, we are, let's say, utilizing this body, and we as soul is the spirit as incarnate in a body. We we control all our body, right? We are aware of everything that happens in our body, and in the same way, uh, doing an analogy, Kardec says that God is also is aware of all the universe, all nature, right? And it's a kind of analogy that he does here. And now, how can we contact God, right? Should we pray for God speaking loudly, right? For example, and the Kardec says, no, to be heard by God, our prayers do not have to cross through space, do not have to be spoken with a resounding voice. Just I can pray just by thought, right? Just by thinking, and uh, God being constantly at our side, our thoughts resound within God. Right? It's not we can doesn't we don't need to talk, right, to God. Just thinking, God is already um, receiving, let's say, our message, our prayers. Uh, and then the next topic is, can we see God? Well, I think that answer we saw already in the beginning of this presentation. Right? We will have we will we will be allowed to see God only when we reach our perfection. Right? So that will take a long time. Still a long time. Um, so the vision of God, Kardec says that the things of a spiritual essence cannot be perceived by physical organs. So we incarnate in a body, for sure cannot see God, right? Because God is not something material. But Kardec says that it's through spirit sight only that we can see the spirits and the things of the material world. Meaning that, for example, a seeing medium, although he or she is incarnate in a body, he has or she has this capacity, this spirit sight, which allows him or her to see the spirits, meaning to see the spiritual body, right, of a discarnate person, for example, or to see things from the spiritual realm, the material world, which Kardec mentioned here. Uh, so that only our soul could have the perception of God. But even when we will be discarnate in the future, we still will not be possible to us to see God because we are not uh, perfect enough for that, right? And that's why Kardec says that seeing God through the spirit sight is the privilege of the most purified souls, and very few possess the necessary degree of dematerialization. Huh? And then he give us Kardec give us a crude comparison to make this fact easier to understand. So suppose he says that someone in the depths of a valley is immersed in a thick fog and cannot see the sun, right? So a fog uh, avoid us to does not allow us to see the sun, and we are there in the valley. And but then there is a mountain in front of us, and we see also the diffused light from the sun, and then we can infer that, well, the sun is there in some place over there, right? So then we begin to ascend that mountain which is in front of us, and as we go higher and higher, that fog begins to clear and the light becomes brighter, and but we still cannot see the sun, right? We see that light when we were uh, below was very diffuse. That then the light becomes clear, but we cannot see the sun, huh? And when we reach the top of the mountain, above the fog or the haze, and then we find ourselves in a situation to see the sun in all its splendor, right? And we can see perfectly in clear air, right? The sun. So uh, the analogy here is that we, as human beings, in our present state of evolution, we are as those guys on the depths of the valley, right? And the most purified spirits, which can see God, were the ones that have ascended the mountain, right? Meaning that they have purified themselves enough to see God face to face. So that's the example here, just to understand, right? So, and then meaning that when we purified ourselves in enough, let's say, um, level of evolution, then we can see God. And the same applies to the example of the man climbing the mountain. Kardec says that the same applies to the soul, right? That we also I have also mentioned here. So, uh, uh, and what Kardec says that although invisible and intangible to us, the perispiritual envelope or our perispirit is truly material and is still too dense for certain perceptions. So that's why, as I said, even when we are discarnate, we still cannot see God, right? Because our perispirit is too dense, is still too dense. And as we evolve morally and intellectually, and then our parent spirit becomes spiritualized, and to the degree that we ascend in morality, and then our parent spirit becomes lighter, becomes subtle, and then the imperfection of the soul that we, for example, we have now are like that fog, right? That haze that obscures our sight. And it's only after we are completely purified that we can enjoy the fullness of our faculties. And then, with our spirit sight rid of the moral veils, like Kardec says, that obscure our vision, then we will be allowed to see God, right? Wherever we may be, because God is everywhere, right? So that is what Kardec comments about the vision of God. Some someday in the far future we will be allowed to see, right? And how 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 long it will take to get there depends on our free will. Now let's talk a little bit about the good and evil, right? Because when we saw about morality, morality is involved the concept of good and evil. Right? We learn, for example, in the Spirit book, in the first chapter of the book three of the Spirit book, Kardec, no, the Spirit, right, answering to Kardec's questions and explains or define to us what is good and what is evil, right? And there they say that the good is everything that is in accordance with and which it gets, let's say, good is everything that gets closer to God, right? And evil is everything that deviates from God, right? Which goes away from God, right? So that's that simple definition. And let's take a look here about the origin of good and evil, right? Who has created good and who has created evil, right? So that is the question here, and this is the question that the philosophers have been reflecting about it centuries, right? And by through centuries. And well, the origin of good, I think, is clear to everybody, right? The origin of good is God, right? Because we saw that one of God's attributes is that God is supremely just and good, right? So goodness comes from God. But what about evil? Does God has created evil also? So that's the question, right? And the comment of Kardec about this is that since God is infinitely wise, just, and good, God cannot produce anything which is unwise, unjust, or evil. Right. So he, in the beginning, Kardec is affirming here that evil cannot come from God. Right. But if evil, in the Kardec argument here, right? If evil was the attribute of a special being, what is the idea here? The idea here is that in the past, some religions used to believe in two powers in the universe, huh? The power of goodness and the power of evil. We still that have in the Christian religion, right? By the idea of a God from the good side and Satan from the evil side, right? So this is a belief that comes from centuries ago, right? And but then let's think about Satan, for example, right? The prince the principle of evil. Right? If such a special being, who in this case Satan, existed, then either such being would be equal to God because it would be as powerful or as God, and consequently and eternal as God, or it would be inferior to God. If Satan, in this example, would be equal to God, then there would be two rival powers, two gods actually, struggling, something that is irreconcilable with the order of the universe. But then let's suppose that such a being would be inferior to God. Well, if such a being would be inferior to God, then it would be a creation of God, a God's creation, which doesn't make sense, right? Because that would mean that God had, by creating an evil being, God would have indirectly created the evil, right? Which is makes no sense to our thinking. So it would be the negation of the infinite goodness of God. So the conclusion here that there is no such special being, right? There is no Satan, there is no God of evil, right? In the universe. There is only one God, and this only on one God is the origin only from good. But then the question remains unanswered, right? And but evil, we can see evil, right? In our world, for example, we can see wars, we can see people killing others. We just saw today, right? That news from China, that a driver which drove his car and killed more than 30 people. So that's some those are evil actions, right? So then the question remains: what is the origin of evil, right? So that's why Kardec says, well, nevertheless, evil does exist and does have a cause. And we have, then he starts to talking about the types of evil. Huh? There are evils of every kind, Kardec says, whether physical or moral, and they form two categories that must be distinguished. Um, the first category of evils are those that humans can avoid, right? Meaning that those that are provoked by ourselves, right? Because, for example, if we think about a war does not happen as a result, an action of nature, right? So, an earthquake results from an action of nature, but a war, no. A war is a action from we as human beings, right? So, such kind of actions we could avoid, right? Because depending on ourselves. But the second category of evil are those that are outside of our will, such as natural calamities, the earthquake that I have just mentioned, right? So, regarding the second type of evil, the natural calamities or the pandemic that we have went through the last years, what Kardec says is that to face such natural calamities, God gave us our intelligence, and then with such intelligence can help us to avoid or mitigate the effects of a natural calamities, right? For example, with our intelligence, we as human beings developed the vaccine, right, to fight the coronavirus, right, the pandemic. And for example, in countries which are exposed to earthquakes, like Japan, for example, we as human beings build uh, and we construct the buildings which are heavy flexibility, right? To face an earthquake, for example. So that's what is interesting about the existence of natural calamities. Does not depend on ourselves, but with our intelligence we can develop let's say, devices or instruments to avoid or mitigate the effects of such natural calamities. And then the more we acquire wisdom in advancing civilization, the less such calamities will be disaster. What we must point here, we must comment here, is that unfortunately, we could say that, well, in our days, maybe in Kardec's day, in middle of the 19th century, natural calamities was something purely, let's say, provoked, right, by nature. But in our days, we know that many natural calamities, like drowning, like well, such a events that happened in the United States, we 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 we, we know that are also consequences of our action, right? As we cause the destruction of our nature, then we have such consequences. So in nowadays, natural calamities could be both, right? Something which is an effect from nature itself, but also there are some that are effect of our action or negative action, let's say, on nature, right? Right? And but the most numerous evils that we suffer, Kardec says, are those that we created by ourselves due to our vices or defects, right? Our imperfection. So there lies, as I mentioned, wars, calamities provoked by, for example, this problem of the climate, right? The warming climate, dissensions, injustice, oppression. So most of such maladies are created by ourselves as human beings and could be avoided, right? If we wish to. And God does not provoke any of such evil, right? So we provoke by ourselves because God has established laws of full of wisdom, Kardec says, which have only the good as their purpose and purpose of such laws. And we as human, we have within ourselves everything that we needed to comply with them. As I said, right, we had in our conscience the laws of God. So meaning that in the deepest unfold, let's say, of our conscience, we know what is truth, what is goodness, what is justice, right? And then uh, our pathway, Kardec says, is traced out by our conscience, right? And the divine laws is engraved on our heart. So that's what I just said. I have just said, right? The laws of God is there in our conscience, and if we follow such laws that are in conscience, then there would be no wars, or no injustice, no killings, or no natural calamities provoked by us, right? And so on and so forth. So and then and we can avoid, right, the most pungent ills and live happily on earth. Right? If you don't do that, is because of our free will, because and less well, meaning the bad use of our free will, right? But instead of looking for the goodness of we ourselves, for our beloved ones, of our community, of nature, we use badly our free will by thinking just about well, by being selfish, right? So then we must suffer the consequences of such bad actions that it follows our the bad use of our free will. But then Kardec says that God has placed the remedy alongside evil, meaning that the evil itself gives rise to the good. Um, well, he explained how that happens, right? He says that a time comes when the excess of moral evil becomes intolerable to ourselves, right? And make us feel the necessity to change course. That there is, in some point of our life, we feel the need to change the course of action, right, of our lives. and then necessity forces us to improve morally in order to be happier, right? So to be happy. So that's why Kardec says that God has placed the remedy alongside evil. And that is something very interesting because it means that the evil that happens in our life, the suffering that happens in our life, is not something which comes to punish us, right? Like they were a punishment from God, right? No. Suffering in our life, any kind of a suffering that we can have in our life, is some kind of a warning, right? Well, you are not going through the correct way, right? So it's time to think about and change your ways. So that's what is being said here, right? So that's why evil itself in our lives uh, kind of forces us, right, to rethinking the direction of our lives. So that's what is interesting. In the end, where is evil, right? So evil comes from our free will, but and the consequences of our evil actions are suffering. But the suffering that comes from our evil action has the meaning of redirecting us to the good path. For that's why evil is always temporary, right? So good no, good is eternal as God. That's why Kardec says that one could say that evil is the absence of the good, the same as cold is the absence of heat, right? So cold is not something real, you know, it's something, something substantial. Heat is something substantial, right? Cold is just the absence of heat, we say, right? Like we say also, for example, darkness is not something substantial. What is substantial is light, right? Darkness is just the absence of light. So, uh, in the same way, evil is not something substantial, meaning that we see evil, for example, in our current world, but that is temporary because we will evolve as human beings, as spirits, right? And in some day in the future, there will be no more evil in our earth when we develop ourselves, right, morally. So something that is temporary is not something substantial. By the other side, goodness, this is something that is eternal, right? It's something substantial because it's something that is comes from God, and everything that comes from God has this attribute of eternity. So, and that's why we say that where good does not exist, evil necessarily does, which happens in the situation in our world today, right? And but not practicing such evil is already the beginning of the good. We say today that we are going through a planetary transition. Right? This is something that we are going to see next month, right? In the final chapter that we're going to see of this Genesis book. And today we live in a world of trial and expiations where evil predominates over goodness, right? And then we are going, well, it will take maybe some centuries, still some centuries, right? But we are going in the direction, our planet, right? We as humanity are going to a world of regeneration, we say. In such a world, there is no predomination of evil over goodness anymore, right? So this is a evolution, right? This is a development of ourselves. And that's because God desires only the good. Evil proceeds from ourselves when we are still imperfect, right? But as we evolve, we also will desire in the future only the good. So, well, finally, right, at the end of the day, we can say that since we as humans have the cause of evil within ourselves, we could avoid the evil whenever we wished, right? Because through our free will, right? So, and for such purpose, that we have our free will and the divine laws that are in our conscience as a guide, right? And also we can follow the gospel of Jesus, like we say, right? We as spirits and spiritists, And that's what we say, and we see also that in the Spirit's book that Jesus, for example, or Christ, he is our model and guide, right? Because our 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 goal is to reach the same perfection, right, as Jesus Christ has, right? So when we get there, we will only desire the good, no evil anymore. And we'll get when we get there, then we will understand more clearly what God is, and also we can see, let's say, God face to face, as Paul the Apostle says in one of these letters, right, in the New Testament. So that's what. Oh, there is one more slide here. I thought it was the last. And then, if evil is the result of imperfection, well, I think we went through that also. If evil is the result of our imperfection, we may say that at least God has created the cause of evil. No, because had made and then we can ask, well, why God did not create us perfect, right? Because in that case, we will not take any bad action, right? But then the answer is, if God has had created us perfect, uh, of sure, evil would not exist. But then we would have no merit, right, of being perfect. So God wanted us as human souls, by virtue of our own free will, to be able to choose between good and evil. And in the beginning, we actually we choose more evil than good, right? But as we evolve, and that's why the meaning of the necessity of a reincarnation, as we develop our moral sense, then we progress, right? And such progress will be the fruit of our own effort. So we will have the merit of reaching a situation, a stage of a development where we will only desire good and no evil anymore. So that's what God desired for us. So that's why God has not created us perfect, right? So and but when well. Uh, when we are still in our imperfect situation today, we bear the responsibility, right, for the evil committed by us as a result of our free will. But let's be optimistic, right, and know that the purpose of our reincarnation is to reach such perfection by our own merit, right? And then that's the reason why God did not create us perfect. I think this is the last, let's say. Yes. So today we had this overview of the God topics from the Genesis book, and then next month we'll see the last chapter. Is the last chapter also the 18th chapter of the Genesis book, which talks about this issue here. The time has come. So it talks about this planetary transition, right, that I mentioned already, right? So that's what I have today. Thank you for following me, and now I'm open to any kind of questions or comments you may have. Stephen,
Good, my friends. Thank you.
it was
Yeah.
a little bit longer today.
But the topic is very important. You need to. You cannot summarize this.
Yeah, yeah, it's,
Yeah. So, student improvise was with us. Corvin, Luviem, Trevor, Antonio
Antonio.
Lima. So good to have you all here with us. Thank you so much for
Yeah,
joining
yeah, thank you.
our conversation here.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Stephen, I think I will. Well, let's have the last presentation in December. Is that okay for
yes,
you?
yeah, that's what I'm gonna ask you because we
Mm,
have this holiday season. So,
mm.
which date is better for you?
I'm thinking about the 10th of September.
10th.
uh,
Okay.
because next week I have some other appointments.
Okay. Okay. So let's do the 10th of September.
Yeah,
It's good
then
because after this we take a break and um, people can enjoy their
yeah,
families. Yeah.
yeah. Then we finish the Genesis book, and then next year we can talk about the Gospels according to Spiritism.
Okay. Good. We have a deal.
Okay.
Okay. So we have no questions.
No.
So if
Hope
you
it's not clear.
yeah. So if you don't mind, can you do the final prayer?
Sure, sure.
Okay.
Okay. So thank thank you all again for being with us. And
See,
then let's. let-
Luvium said a very good explanation. Thank you. So
Oh, all right. Thank you. Okay.
thank you, Lu. Thank you.
Uh, so let's have our final prayer, and then let's thank the spiritual benefactors, which is always with us, help and support us to present the best we can about some well complex issues. I would say, right? The spiritism is not that simple matter, but with their help, we can well at least um, talk in a understandable way. I hope about such matters. And also, let's thank Jesus for this opportunity to being here, all of us, reunited online and in His name, because we are studying spiritism that comes from His teachings. And finally, we thank God, right? Which was that was the topic from today, thanking God by the gift of a life that we have and the opportunity that we have through the reincarnation in this planet and in the future in more evolved world and to purify ourselves more and more until we reach perfection and then be able to understand God and to see God face to face. So be it.
Amen. So yeah, unfortunately, for me to see God face to face is far away.
It will take a long time still,
Yeah, yeah,
but we'll get there.
yeah. Somehow we're gonna get there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
that's the good news. We will get there.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. So thank everybody. Thank you, Roberto. Thank you, Fesp. Thank you,
Thank
Trevor, Student Improvise. Thank you, Lu. Thank you, Antonio Lima. So um, uh, please be in touch, and we will be back on the 10th of December. Okay.
you.
Thank
Right.
you. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.